Welcome to episode 7 of the Building Interactive website series, where we'll learn how to actually add interactive elements to our web pages. So as of right now, we're able to create content on our websites, but users are not able to physically interact with the content. To fix this, we need some interactive elements to make the user experience more interesting. One way to add interactivity is by implementing buttons, which can be done simply by making use of the button tag. Inside this button tag, you want to put in text that should appear inside the button. So for example, if I were to say, get free money, then a button will appear saying, get free money, exactly what I wrote inside of here. Additionally, you can make text boxes like this one that are resizable and allow text to be typed into them by making use of the text area element. Now if I were to run this code, you can see that this text box now appears. Additionally, we can set initial text to be displayed inside this text area by putting text inside of this text area tag. So if I were to type in hello, you can see this text area now has hello as its value by default. It has some additional attributes too, like rows, which determine the height of the text area. For example, one row makes it so that the text area is only one line high, but if we do 2 rows, then it's 2 lines of text high. And you can make it any size that you want. Additionally, there is a calls attribute which determines how wide the text area should be. So 1 means that the text area is only 1 character wide, but you can increase this to make it slightly better looking and easier to use. Additionally, we can add an ID to this text area, making use of the ID attribute. The ID is meant to not contain white space, and there should only be one single ID for every element. So in this case, I'm just going to call it my text area with a dash, because dashes are allowed in ID names. And with this, nothing appears to change on the outside, but we can now add a label for this text area, making use of the label element. We can add a for attribute to this label and give it the same value as the ID for the text area. So my text area. And then inside this label tag, we want to put the label itself, what this text area is going to be labeled with. So in this case, I'm just going to say enter your text here. And now you can see we now have a label next to this resizable container. And when we click on it, it automatically makes us focus inside the text area. Additionally, if we want an input smaller than a text area and with different functionality, we can make use of the input element. This doesn't have a closing tag because it doesn't have any information on the inside of it, but we can give this input tag a name with the name of what the input tag is for. So in this case, I'm just going to say example. A name should be formatted in the same way as an ID. So now if we run the code, you can see we now have a slightly smaller text box. We can also add a label to input elements as well, making use of the label element again, and then setting an ID. I'm just going to call this example 1 because this is the first input element in this page. And now we can say this label is for example 1, and then we can say enter your data here. And now you can see a label is displayed next to the input element. To change the functionality of the input element, we can make use of the type attribute. Some notable types include checkbox, which makes the input a checkbox, color, which makes it into a color picker, password, which makes it a password box, which hides what you type inside, text, which is what it is by default, just a plain text box, and a radio button, which defines an option in a multiple choice question. This is best displayed when there are multiple input elements, so if I copy this over and then rename this first label to be option 1 and this next one option 2, you can see we can now only select one of these options. Note that in order to have this single choice functionality, the name attributes of both of these inputs have to be the same, because if they're different, then you could select both and not just one single option. Additionally, the file input type makes it a file input where you have to select a file. There's also the number type where you can put in a min value, which is the minimum value it can take, a max value, which is the maximum value that this number value can hold. So you can only pick numbers from 0 to 50 in this one, for example. And there's also a step attribute for this numerical input type, which determines how much it should step over when clicking on the up and down arrows. So now you can see it increases and decreases in increments of 0.1, which is what we specified here. Additionally, another input type called range does the similar thing but slightly differently. Range, unlike the number input type, makes it a slider where you can pick the value by sliding this thumb over. Additionally, for these number or text-based inputs, you can provide an initial value making use of the value attribute. For example, we put the value 10 here, the slider starts out at 10, and we can even change the type back to number, and it'll still start at 10. Additionally, if we change it to type text, and then get rid of all these attributes that are only for numerical input types, and then set it to some text. You can see it starts out as hello, which is what we provided over here. The password type also works with an initial value, just that it's hidden so you can't see exactly what this text says. And for checkboxes and radios, you cannot provide an initial value because there's no text or number to provide. Instead, you can choose if it's automatically checked or not by adding the checked attribute, which makes it automatically checked. And the same thing goes for radio buttons. And as you might have noticed from the auto completion, when we were changing the type attribute of the input element, you might have noticed that there are a lot more types than what we went over. So if you're curious, you can take a look at this website, which I'll link in the description, which goes over more of the different input types. However, this marks the end of the 7th video in this series. Hope you enjoyed this one, and make sure to look out for episode 8.